right, good to go.
Okay, I'm going to call to order the Ramsey-Washington Metro Watershed District November board meeting. As our first action, can I get a motion to approve the agenda? Or I should say, does anybody want to see agendas changed? I have a motion to approve the agenda, please. Motion to approve. Second?
Seconded.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, consent agenda. We have a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Perfect. I'm going to say discussion on this one because I have a couple of questions. Just curious, and on the permit applications, there seemed like there were two areas that held water. So as you guys were going through or working with the contract company to do the assessment, what did you do to build confidence that the storage is sufficient, knowing that it had held water for many years, it seems? And this was for 23, 24 as an example, and there's another one, I think it's 26.
Sure. So for 23-24, which is the Washington County Service Center, there was a low spot that was due to previous grading for the roadway, developed a low spot on the parcel that, you're correct, did hold water. It developed wetland characteristics. That's included in our 100-year floodplain calculations. So we have modeled a 100-year flood elevation for that site. So that's what the applicant was using and provided calculations for cut and fill below that elevation to demonstrate that they're essentially replacing that flood storage on the landscape.
Okay. And Nicole, do they pump that water somewhere before they start?
They will.
Okay.
Yeah, they'll have to probably. I guess I haven't been out there since 2022, so we've had a couple years of drought. There were cattails, I know. So they depending on when they start construction, they may have to dewater. That water should be clean, and there's a variety of practices that we would require them to use to safely and cleanly discharge that water before they set to continue mass grading on that site.
Okay.
And if there's any question about the incidental thing, I can go into that too. But
are you ready? Yes, please.
Okay.
That was the next question.
Yeah. So
it occurred twice, right? Because this also occurred in 27, two incidentals.
Yes.
46.
So the Wetland Conservation Act, just as a reminder, is a state law that the district is responsible for administering in most areas. The exceptions would be City of St. Paul and within MnDOT right-of-way. They are their own, Wetland Conservation Act we refer to as WACA. They're their own WACA administrators. But for all other areas in our district, we're the ones that are administering and enforcing the Wetland Conservation Act. And it's very clear about what it defines as incidental wetlands, which are incidentally created and not for the purposes of creating wetlands. So, for instance, a low spot that formed wetland characteristics but was previously upland. It wasn't meant to be graded as a wetland or restored as a wetland. Another example of an wetland, like you'll see later, and I think it was, you said 23-27, constructed stormwater ponds. They have wetland characteristics just like a historical wetland would, but they don't have the same protections under the Wetland Conservation Act. Because they're constructed, they're man-made. They weren't constructed for wetlands, they were constructed for stormwater management. So hopefully that helps. And where this comes into play with our rules is that incidental wetlands don't require replacement if they're impacted.
Is that covered in our governance or in our watershed management report? I don't remember incidental. I guess that's what I was curious about.
Well, it's part of the Wetland Conservation Act. So we don't have the whole wetland. That's a state law.
Understood.
So that's a
okay. So that's what governs the fact that we don't have to do new laws because they don't technically qualify that as a wetland.
We don't have, right. the
Yeah, as
no laws,
like
right.
a class 1 through whatever.
Yeah.
4.
But do we have a policy that is in addition to the Wetland Conservation Act that deals with these incidental wetlands when they come up for construction?
Not
No, so we
specifically,
follow
no.
wetland so our rules state that we administer the Wetland Conservation Act.
So that if a contractor comes upon some land with a bunch of incidental wetlands on it, they could foreseeably fill them all in and we have no rules to say, no, that might not be great.
One, it looked like one of them, they looked back as part of the judgment that did it or did it not once was a wetland, and in both of these cases, I think it was.
So as part of the incidental wetland review, you would look at
The historical piece.
data to see if it was historically wetland or not, so. I mean, in most cases, we wouldn't wanna hold up something because of a low spot that developed characteristics.
Yeah.
It wasn't meant to be for wetland.
But if it's functioning and useful, I'm just throwing this out now. I wasn't really thinking about this before, but if there's some functional, useful incidental wetlands, and as our land develops and redevelops as it's going to do, would it behoove us to somehow consider if they're valuable and trying to, I'm just.
So we do from a flood control perspective. That's why, you know, they're required to replace that storage if they develop the landscape. Even if it wouldn't otherwise trigger our permit, if they're impacting floodplain, that triggers our permit.
That's what I wanted to, that it is considered
Yeah.
a wetland. They would have to replace it if they got rid of it, even if it is incidental.
No, they don't need to replace the land, but the storage, she's saying for flood.
And if it's deemed a
Storage.
wetland historically, then it would be a wetland. It'd be judged, if I recall correctly. If I'm remembering
Yeah.
right. Because I tried to understand it better, and this one is a little confusing. It was new to me, so. I had a subsequent question on, because they're gonna effectively grade it, like level it out to build something on top of it. So really, is it going to hold water again? Was my subsequent question, or is it just the water gonna go somewhere else? So that flood storage, is it gonna be useful? That's the question I had, but I think I'm happy with, or I know our flood management rules, so I'm fine with that. I just have other subsequent questions. And then lastly, on the storm impact fund, can you help translate what $80,000 to that fund means to us as a governing body? I can't translate that to what it actually means.
So that when money is given to us through the Stormwater Impact Fund, that goes into one of our CIP funds that's labeled Stormwater Impact Fund. And we hold that money until we have projects that are either in that subwatershed in that city. We always look when we're doing our own projects and we apply that money.
It's to the city though, right? Or whatever the.
So our Stormwater Impact Fund plan has,
It's like regions, isn't it? It's not
it's what do you call it, like a step through process. So first we try and spend it within the subwatershed that it was collected in. City would be next, I believe. And then throughout the district, but typically we can find, we
In
have
the city.
projects and in the subwatershed. That's preferable because we want it to be in the subwatershed.
Thank you for the answering the questions. I don't have any change to opinion on the consent. I just wanted to understand.
I have a question on permit 2324, I believe it's Washington County Service Center. Is it an issue that the Wetland Conservation Act permit was issued just over 5 years ago and would be in effect 5 years? And so with tonight's action, depending upon if it remains within the consent and is approved, technically that permit is no longer valid because it's a 5-year period.
So the 5-year was for the wetland boundary. Effectively pending approval, that wetland's going away. It's not being used to establish buffer. I don't want to say the boundary no longer matters, but the no loss for developing the site is a year old. So it's just the boundary that's 5 years old.
And is that boundary still pertinent if it was a what's it called, incidental?
It's not.
That's what I was, so the subsequent WACA superseded it, it's the way I read it.
So the first was a loss, no loss determination,
That's
and
what I
the
thought.
second was a boundary determination, is that way they
No.
work?
No, the
Other
boundary-
way around.
Other way around? Okay,
The
Mhm.
boundary was up about 5 years ago, a year ago. for
Because
the-
we thought it was a wetland at that point.
Yeah, anytime when there's any areas, we require the delineation. to be-
okay, so that's,
I just
that was, yeah, that was the delineation essentially then that was determined 5 years
5
ago.
years ago, yeah.
Well, any further discussion? Thank you for the education, Nicole.
Yeah.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And if I could just mention for the benefit of some of our visitors, we have from the Taco Bell project in Gladstone Crossing, by approving the consent agenda, those projects are approved, so you don't need to hang on for the rest of the meeting. It's easy to miss, so I just wanted to let you know.
Thanks, Nicole. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
I did want to say thank you for adding the extra information on the change order.
Yeah,
I
good.
appreciate it.
Hope that was helpful.
Yeah, I mean, it puts things into perspectives for sure. But it definitely, in my eyes, like it's like, oh, we'll watch that one as it goes.
Yep. Can I just say for the benefit of the people online too, the other people in the room besides the 4 board members that you can see are Brandon Barnes and Greg William from BAR, and then Paige and I are here as well.
Oh, yeah, you're focused on us. That's
Yeah.
not- It's fun.
I know sometimes it's hard for them to know who else is here.
So let's go ahead and jump to visitor comments. Does anyone on the phone, not associated with Ramsey-Washington Metro Watershed District, have comments that they'd like to make? I think that's just Stephanie.
Yeah.
But no, I see not. Okay. So let's jump to permit programs. Back to you, Nicole.
Yeah, this permit includes a variance request, so it's sort of standing alone for discussion if the board would like. It's a city trail project along Lake Road. The stormwater alternative compliance that they're seeking is to construct an offsite BMP, a filtration basin. It is located in the same subwatershed as the project, which is nice because it's still achieving the water quality goals. I can't remember. I think it was Battle Creek Lake. Oh, Carver Lake. And then the variance request is for wetland buffer. So just to be clear, there's no impacts to the wetland itself proposed. In existing conditions, the roadway, the way that it's aligned, does not meet buffer requirements, and they're proposing to add a sidewalk or a multi-use trail. They are proposing a couple things to sort of offset this loss of buffer, which is for the board to discuss if you'd like. One being is they're tilting the sidewalk toward the roadway so that there's not direct discharge to the wetland. Vegetated buffer between the side or the trail and the roadway, both for some TSS removal and rate control purposes, and then proposing sort of an expanded no development buffer area on the northeast boundary of the wetland. This is another one where there's areas within the 100-year floodplain. So similar to the last project, they've submitted calculations for that relevant flood elevation to achieve no net loss of flood storage as a result of this project. But if there's any questions, let me know.
Yeah, on that replaced buffer area, that's already a vegetated buffer. Are they granting some type of easement or something in writing where that will never be developed, or is this just like a pretty graphic?
I mean,
justify?
yeah, it's a good, good faith effort, but we can request whatever you'd like, or I can look into it.
Well,
Is
I
that
think
something you'd like me to request as sort of a easement of sorts?
I don't know what we request, but just to say an existing vegetated buffer area is replaced buffer just doesn't seem right to me unless it's actually going to be maintained as such in perpetuity.
Yeah, I can request whatever you'd like.
I guess I would,
understand the maintenance plan for the buffer. Is it something that they're going to include would be a nice thing in their maintenance strategy?
For that portion. And obviously the disturbed areas. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm curious if, because are they gonna make it more, are they gonna plant something different than what's already there? I think I read that that was the plan, but I just didn't know if, does that make the buffer more effective?
So not that I'm aware of, my understanding was that, like Ben was alluding to, that they would not develop that area, that it would remain a vegetated natural buffer, like it is in existing conditions. And I already forgot the other part of your question, Val.
No, you got it. Well, it's
Oh.
more of, go ahead. I think you answered what I was looking for, but effectively they're just saying we're not going to develop this area.
Yeah, I remember the other. Yeah, so they're quantifying replacement of buffer almost like you would for a wetland replacement plan. It's not really relevant to our rules to say that there's sort of no net loss of buffer, because a buffer is meant to achieve water quality purposes for the wetland via our setbacks or widths along the wetland area. So I think they're just doing it to say, like, you know, they're trying, but it's not really relevant to our rules to quantify, you know, like we would for floodplain or wetland, like existing versus proposed conditions for buffer, because it really is meant to get at that width. However, you know, staff are recommending approval. That's for the board to decide. It's the way that the roadway exists, which they're not, you know, proposing to change. It already doesn't meet buffer requirements. So effectively, not granting the variance, I don't, you know, the sidewalk, just the trail won't go in.
Yeah,
You know, so that's why it's a variance. It's a case by case consideration for the board to discuss, but
this
we've
wetland
certainly thought
complex,
about.
the
Yeah.
wetland complex, is this a city parcel? Do we know the ownership outside of the road easement?
I do not. I mean, we walked it to look at the boundary, but are you talking about for future development purposes again? Like, would it
Essentially,
be an easement? Yeah.
But the buffer would never be developed because it's always gonna be a buffer that can't be
but
developed.
there's nothing in, it's just good faith that they're replacing this buffer over here. We don't have anything saying or holding them to that. If this is a city parcel where, and I can tell this wetland is, you know, 80% of the parcel anyway, so
Right.
development would be very minimal if at all possible. And I think the purpose of the trail is good. I don't have any issue with that part of the buffer. It's just that replaced buffer. It's not really replacing buffer. I mean, it's existing buffer essentially that they're labeling replaced buffer.
Yeah, they're going for preservation versus like creation of buffer.
Yeah, and I guess that's where my question is something where I don't know that we go after, I don't know what the answer is. It would just be nice to understand the future.
If it can request
plans would be,
something,
or if any at all, on this parcel. Like I said, if it's a city owned parcel and it's going to remain a natural area, I think that would just having that knowledge would be probably good enough for me. I don't know that we need to pursue a permanent easement on it.
Could we add a special provision that states that versus having some sort of, like you said, easement or proof of easement or something?
regarding that replacement buffer area, do we have any understanding of was there rationale in terms of why they chose that particular location?
The rest, I think the rest are residential property.
Well, yeah, I guess I'm looking at the,
Or are you talking like this northern area or?
yeah, I'm wondering if it were closer to the wetland. The figure that they provide, I can't really see a lot of structures or any, buildings there. It looks to me like it's green space. Why did they choose to place it at that footprint versus closer to the wetland?
I think it is
It
just a
does
graphic decision. Like, to me, it reads as a non-solution solution. It looks good, but it's not really doing anything as far as our rules. I mean, I get the purpose of the trail and why they're requesting the variance, but to me, this just seems like they're gonna throw this in there and just to make it look good.
Sure.
Well, and they put it 75 feet from the
Mhm.
wetland edge. I think that's why it's.
So
not-
they're saying that they are adding to the existing buffer.
The way I kind
Well,
of read through
preserving,
it
yeah.
is, the way I'd read through it is they're trying to maintain the average buffer.
Mhm.
Is how they're doing it. So they're just saying, hey, we're gonna take this as buffer and not touch it. So we have an average around, meet the average spec of the buffers. Which I'm comfortable with, but then make sure they maintain it, make sure that they keep it up, that kind of thing. If we just come back later and it's the same kind of growth, that makes me question if it was for show, but assuming good faith, then let's make sure it's maintained.
Nicole, we'll have a maintenance agreement for this project, is that correct? Or with our cities, we have overall agreements for how they maintain BMPs.
There's no BMPs on this corridor, but
Okay, so
We don't
there's
have
not, there wouldn't be a
wetland.
maintenance, anything.
Yeah, and the way that I read it, the buffer restoration is essentially the blue area.
Yeah.
They're not doing anything extra to this area. And that's why I said, like, if it is going to be remained as green space and we continue to act as that buffer, I think it's good and valid, but if it's just, that's where I question, like, who's the ownership and
Yeah.
is there a future
So what
plan?
if we added a special provision that asks for assurance from the city that this area will remain in buffer status? I don't know what the right language is there, but something that they give us assurance and we have that in our files and for this project.
It's a great point.
I know, Tracy, that's probably not, I mean,
Yeah,
once
I mean,
we close the permit, that's probably not valid anymore, but.
you could ask for a recorded easement. I mean, essentially, we're just asking for that use to be limited so that the buffer remains. Only we're really short of that in case somehow it changes title is to record it,
Mhm.
And was there something in the language that could be corrected if it's saying buffer replacement and it's actually buffer
Preservation.
preservation? Maybe that language could be corrected if that's true.
Yeah, on the plan sheets, do you want them to revise the variance request language? Like the narrative portion, I guess, or just on the plan sheets. So it's like a no disturb note.
Yeah,
I mean-
that's probably more useful.
Yeah.
I would also question, is there wetland in this wetland buffer? Because the line just kind of stops here, but it looks like there's a wet area that kind of snakes around and
I think
into
the
this form.
line is to the north, to the east, I guess.
Yeah, it goes, but it just kind of stops here. Is
Well, then
that?
it stops up there, see where the line continues going.
Yeah,
Yeah, so that's, but like you can see open water through here.
Right,
So I'm guessing they just stopped their wetland survey X amount away from the road. Like, I would guess, looking at this aerial, this wetland would extend kind of something like that.
well, they looked at the whole
there's a.
corridor. I'd have to pull up the delineation, but
You see there's those buildings there,
Mhm.
so I don't think it goes,
It
looks like it probably goes.
probably
in
connects somewhere back in here.
Do we, and just to build on that, I wasn't aware that we measured buffer just to wet area. Is that true? Or is that line
Well, the
item
line is the
wet, just
delineation.
the
It's
wet, that's a
just-
wetland?
It's the wetland
Yeah,
boundary.
it's not meaning.
Yeah.
Right.
Where
Right.
water is.
Yeah, it's the
Okay.
wetland.
No, I was pointing out where I can see water on here, because that's an indicator that there may be wetland up into that space.
When I looked at the diagram, I think that's where I had questions. I like the walkway, you need the walkway, we're gonna encounter a lot of this as we continue to develop in these cities, I mean. Have we, as an organization, asked something like BAR, or looked at ways to make buffers more efficient? Or do something to this effect, so like, this is not at all a suggestion, but I know when we have really wet areas in the house, we put weeping tile and a drain pipe in, or French drain in. Just to keep the water move into a place where it can actually be absorbed and do, whatever else it does. Are there solutions, technical solutions that we can consider for these buffer areas that are getting smaller and smaller?
It's mostly around the planting aspects of it and the plants that are used, as long as it, has an opportunity to filter the water. There isn't a real, I wouldn't say technical.
You couldn't like move, once again, I don't know this as well, but you could move some of the water at that 3-foot mark and dump it into that replaced buffer area and hope, or with the goal and purpose of it doing the filtration. Doing more of its share of the filtration.
They're doing that on the other side of the trail, for water quality and rate control purposes.
Okay, so then-
Vegetated buffer, soil amendments and grading, to achieve those goals. They don't really have room, frankly, on the other side, which
Yeah,
is
yeah.
the reason we're even talking about this.
So
But
I would say historically, correct me if I'm wrong, but the precedent for this would be they would ask for a variance because it already doesn't meet the buffer requirements. And so
Yep.
them saying that they're preserving this area is a bonus that we don't even normally get maybe with these projects.
That we can't officially enforce,
What's that?
that we can't officially enforce.
Well, I think we can, and we can get some assurances, I should say, whether it's enforceable. But when you have a road corridor, an existing road corridor adjacent to a wetland, it's difficult to, just make buffer. You can't get that in there.
If they're saying in good faith that this is a area that they will maintain as buffer. As was brought up, we don't know the ownership. Is there a reason we couldn't ask them to record that? If they own it, would they object to, doing a deed restriction recorded? We kind of call their bluff. I mean, yeah, there's a cost with it. I don't know.
we can
that-
certainly ask.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure, I'd ask Tracy, is that a dangerous precedent? It's not like we're trying to say, well, you're asking for a variance and within that variance, we're gonna condition this such that you must record it. They're offering it up. That would just be a further step to assure that it's maintained.
There's really nothing punitive of recording an agreement, right? I mean, we can draft a simple agreement, but the only difference is we might need a surveyor to be involved to actually delineate where it is. When we record, it's going to say, okay, we've got to maintain this buffer. And if that is interpreted by somebody that's trying to build, and now where is that buffer? So the only issue it really presents is probably getting a surveyor to delineate exactly where this requirement is going to land on their property. But other than that, the recording of it, it's not punitive. It's a simple document. It wouldn't take me long to draft. It's just making sure it's where it's supposed to be. That's where it take a little bit of delay in time. But I don't think to ask them to say, listen, you've agreed that you're going to maintain this as a buffer, and we want to make sure that anyone that owns this property in the future knows that that needs to be maintained as a buffer. Recording that document is an easy thing to do. It's just we have to delineate it.
So I actually do see on this image, it does say City of Woodbury as the property
Yeah, I was seeing
Yeah.
that too.
those
Yeah.
parcels. So it is city property, I would guess, I mean, they could even just say, you know, on this, well, I guess, I don't know if there's any hard structures in there, but
I don't see any.
you know, if they wanna just say for that whole parcel, it would be conservation, but.
Well, that's true.
Mhm.
I mean, maybe we don't, maybe they're fine with a blanket saying that there should be, as part of this permit, we will record a maintenance agreement for the buffer, you know, near the wetland. They might be just fine with that. And, you know,
Yeah.
that wouldn't be hard to draft nor record.
Is, one of the curiosities I had is, so we don't build BMPs in the buffer, that's right? Is that correct statement?
Right.
I believe that is correct.
Notice
It's a
of buffer.
notice or buffer, yep.
And so with the, but that area, from what I'm gathering here, is actually outside of the maximum distance buffer. Could they
Yeah.
build a BMP there? Out of curiosity,
Well,
or
not
trying
if
to
we're
just-
asking them to keep it buffer.
yeah, that, I was just
Right.
offering another solution.
Yeah.
If there's a BMP
I think if
there,
they could build a BMP there, they would have for this project. But
Okay.
yeah, but yeah, no, that would be part of that.
because then there's a maintenance in it.
no
this amount of
disturb.
feet. Yeah,
Hmm.
I think we could write a special provision or add a special provision that requires assurance through easement or, I don't know, Tracy, help me with the, the words.
Yeah. Truly, it would be requiring an agreement to maintain this buffer that would be drafted in recordable form and could be recorded in the tract index.
Good.
that seems good.
And I can help draft that.
Yeah,
I like to assume good faith on these types of things, so it does feel like they're trying. I appreciate it. I totally get Ben's
Yeah.
point. I think it's a very valid one. The walkways are nice, important, and the more contiguous they are, the more likely they're gonna be used, so.
Yeah, but having that buffer
Record.
there and the wetland there, you know, people like to see that kind of green space and you know, pick the number, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, there's a whole new set of decision makers and
Mhm.
it's forgotten. I just think it's there to provide some assurance, and it doesn't cost much, not asking much.
I like that one.
Good idea.
It's good.
Sounds good.
Okay,
I think it's a great idea.
so can I get a motion to approve 23-25
With the added special
with the
provision.
added special provision? And do I have to say something about the record? Or that's part
That
of the
would be
provision?
part of the provision.
Perfect, with
And I think
the
we have that
added
language.
special provision.
So we'll
I'll second that motion.
Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Moving on to the enforcement action reports.
yeah, it was a tough month. A lot of rain. Me and Mary are both just kind of shell shocked and exhausted, but there is some, yeah, I feel like we got all of our rain that we've been wanting this whole summer spread out, but all in one month and a couple rain events. I think the Heights, which is the first site update on the report, recorded 10 inches of rain in October. So, and I know it was 8 inches in a lot of other places in the district. So yeah, I certainly can answer any questions about these updates. Speaking of the Heights, we did meet with the St. Paul Port Authority, the contractor, and they've actually hired a new engineering firm to be doing inspections for erosion control and construction oversight. The previous company was not really meeting the goals that we all wanted them to meet, so they're gone. There's a new company in place now, so we're hopeful that there's going to be some good coordination moving forward. And as far as the wetlands that are mentioned in the site update, We provided, we looked at the site. It's really tricky and interesting to figure out how this is getting into that pond. The sediment that was found on the roadway is so fine that even if you can't see it, it's causing turbid water conditions. So it's been pretty challenging. But we provided the Heights with some options to consider to prevent this from happening, because we told them, we can't have this happening, having offsite impacts. So we provided a lengthy follow-up yesterday after our meeting with them. So we have some options moving forward. Are there any questions about the Heights?
I have a couple. Regarding that pond to the northeast, it seems a little bit of a mystery, at least as presented in the packet, how that sediment's getting there. I'm not sure that it makes sense that it would be coming off the road directly. There's mention about the drain tiles throughout the site. It really suggests to me that there was that small wetland pond, whatever you wish, that was on the old golf course in the northeast. And, that probably had an outlet somewhere. I'm wondering, has there been any discussion with the city or the county in terms of their sewer network?
Yeah, there is a culvert there. We looked at that pretty extensively. There are sandbags, and that's one of the items that we are suggesting is the different, more watertight blockage of flow. But we need to understand first the flooding implications of that, because we can't flood out McKnight Road. So we need to make sure that we're not creating a public safety hazard by, further blocking that connection. But certainly we have located that. And yeah, that's looked at as a potential source as well.
So there is a pipe that goes through, and you know where that is. Okay.
And there's 4 lines of perimeter control up gradient of that wetland. So it's like baffling. There's
has it improved?
2 lines of, that was still before the latest rain event, I believe. So there's 2 lines of silt fence and there's 2 mulch berms. So, we're also prescribing further up gradient, additional stabilization, like vegetation growth to help with that. But, obviously it's a tricky time in the season. So that's going to have to be perhaps dormant or fall seeded with a cover crop, and then getting right back in there in the spring as soon as possible to get some vegetation growing. But yeah, they have 4 lines of perimeter protection, and it's still, it's really hard. The sediment is just not settling out. So we're also upstream on the Heights site, suggesting chemical flocculants. Those can't be used in wetlands, so we just have to get at potential on-site sources, and then the possibility of flotation silt curtain around the flared ends in the wetlands, so that if there were any further plumes, that they would be contained next to the flared end. So those are some options that we were discussing with the engineering firm. Yeah, it's a really tough location.
I've stated before, I live in the area, I drive by it on almost a daily basis, and it looks like there's a tremendous amount of water in that part of the parcel compared to what it just, previously had been. And I didn't get a chance to look back in the plans, but I believe they're going to have a wetland feature remaining. It just seems like there's a whole lot more water, which attests that whole 10 inches. It's just, the whole thing's wet.
Yeah, and they have a temporary sediment basin, not immediately adjacent, but on the site as well. So that looks like a new water body, but it's meant to capture brown water so that it doesn't leave the site. But yeah, there are a number of those ponding areas as well as their continuing grading operations.
Thank you.
Any other questions on any of the other projects mentioned here?
Maplewood and Sterling, 2315. So there are the two, I believe it's two, filtration basins above their outfall. There was a picture of the outfall and the, well, just down below the outfall. And it looked like there was a fair amount of turbidity and sediment, and I'm just, are those, do we have a sense at this point, are those infiltration basins being overwhelmed? Or are they functioning properly? Is it too early to tell? If water is, moving through and we're still having flow issues, sediments moving.
Yeah, well, the bigger problem is that it's been dirty water coming from the project. So we were told by the city that they're paving this week or last week, I believe. But yeah, I mean, the board is well aware that this has been a thorn in our side, this location in particular, for a while. And we met with the city without the contractor to communicate, what we're up against and what needs to happen. Reminded the city that they are the sole permit holder and ultimately responsible for any impacts. And I think they get it. They're also trying. They reference being understaffed and not being able to do as much construction observation. But we told them that the next option, the only option then, is stop work. And no one wants to see that happen, particularly at this time of year when we want them to hurry up and finish, because that'll help with a lot of these problems. Hurry up and pave and throw that curb and gutter in so that we're not seeing this keep happening. And unfortunately, these October rain events all over the district wreaked havoc. They were poorly timed as far as when people are trying to get final stabilized for winter. So yeah, I think, we're doing the best that we can. And with the paving, this should be an improved location, but I think we noted in the updates that we're going to be scrutinizing these infiltration basins when at closeout time and even earlier next spring, because we are concerned about the sediment load that they've received and if they're going to be functioning well in the long term. So there might be some clean outs happening to those basins.
Do we have any control over, I believe that they had seeded, maybe even planted, the shoulders, bottoms of those basins, and if there's been a lot of sediment, that's all covering those plants, seeds. Like
Yeah,
say,
they'll have to redo it.
not all redone.
They'll have to redo it.
And so
Yep.
we have the ability to make sure that has happened. We won't
Yep.
close the permit.
Right. Yeah.
Definitely. Yep.
Okay.
And frankly, I think the city would at this point, because they're going to be owning and maintaining them and they don't want to inherit something like that either. But yeah, absolutely. With the permit, that's a closeout condition, is the vegetation, the establishment, and the overall functioning drawdown of those basins.
This BMP move to our maintenance at some point in the future?
This is a city.
Yeah, I just want to double check. But they could ask for assistance with our CIP, right?
They could through our maintenance,
Our maintenance program.
not our CIP maintenance, but our other.
Oh, like a pond clean out with our CIP?
Yeah, so we do bigger pond cleanouts that require construction equipment. things that would go under like our CIP maintenance and repair, but if it's a rain garden or an infiltration basin,
We
a
could have to
plant or sediment, then it would go through our,
stewardship.
their
What's it
BMP
called?
maintenance program with our contractors that we hired. So we do still offer that to the cities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it makes me a little nervous.
Well,
that-
I mean,
that-
not, it would have to be after.
Yes.
It's functioning.
Yeah, because, well, and there's a period of time in which they'll
Long
keep
term.
managing it, and then
Yeah.
it'll become our,
Right.
well, or option to us.
They could add.
Yeah,
So we could manage it under our maintenance program, but then send the invoice to the city. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, I think this was mentioned in a previous meeting, or the first time it came in the packet. The discharge point is to, probably it's a stormwater pond that, I mean, that thing is. I've walked over there, again, it's not far from where I live, and it just seems like that historically has had tremendous loads of sediment, and it could benefit from a clean out. And now this additional set of insults, I don't know if that's enough justification that it is something that could be put on a, a slate in cooperation with the city, a CIP, that they would apply for that. So in the future, after this project is long gone, long done and successful, that might be another outcome.
Yeah, so we always offer to the cities before we do our CIP maintenance, if they have pond cleanouts that they want added to our CIP, that they could make those suggestions. So it's based on their prioritization of projects. So that would be an option.
I have communicated to the city that concern, so they're aware that I told them that our board is concerned about the sediment load from pre-project conditions as well. And they answered in that same ways that we have our priority list we have our prioritization of all of our ponds in the city, and that's certainly in their inventory, but as I understand, it's not the top priority for cleanouts at this time. But I did relay the concerns.
Maybe it'll bump up a little bit on their list.
well,
Thank you.
It was a hard month for y'all.
Uh-huh.
Come on, Nicole.
Yeah,
Believe it.
yeah. Good discussion points. Should we move to the stewardship grant? Awesome. Stewardship grant program. Paige.
I don't have much, you approved that one application that came in, that's just to kind of restore that rain garden right across the streets. Yeah, plenty of budget left, so we'll have, I think the carryover that we had expected, and we'll be talking internally about the program, and then come to you and present in December about a summary of the 2023 program and any expected changes or proposed changes for next year.
I don't have any budget questions for you. Thank you for that. Anyone else? Awesome. Man, you're off easy today, Paige.
I'm so sorry.
So let's jump to the action items. First one is Pioneer Park Reuse Project Bid and Award. We've seen this come through a couple times, and I believe you've gotten some bids in.
Yeah.
Yep, so this one, you authorized us to go get bids at the last meeting. We advertised and we received five bids. The low bid was from Peterson Companies. Peterson has installed several of these types of systems before, which in this particular case worked in our favor. As you can see there, we got a very good price from them for this particular project. We did follow up with them after the bids were received, because their number was quite a bit lower than the rest of the bids that we received. We wanted to make sure that they were comfortable with their number, that there wasn't a typo or something like that. We did get confirmation from them after they double checked with the vendor that they were comfortable with their bid. The biggest discrepancy between the low bid, and you can see that the engineer's estimate was higher than a number of those bids. For this type of project, a lot of the cost goes into the equipment, the lift stations, or the pumps that go into the lift station. And then we factor that up by a percentage to account for the labor costs. And the bid with Peterson indicated that they're suggesting they're going to be more efficient than what we had been seeing in recent projects. So that was a big one there. The other big number that came in lower on their estimate relative to the engineer's estimate was their mobilization number was quite a bit lower than what we had anticipated. So with that, then the recommendation then is to proceed with the bid that Peterson Companies submitted. And if you make that decision, the tentative schedule would be construction in the summer with a tentative completion in end of July 2024.
Great, I move we accept the bids and award the Pioneer Park Reuse Project, Peterson Companies, direct staff to prepare and mail notice of award and prepare the agreements and review the required submittals.
Second.
Discussion. I had one question, and it's on when we look in the future, if they do encounter issues that need updates, when we look at our contingency fund, I'm assuming the 458 has some sort of contingency fund for them, or do we measure them against the 692 bar?
So their bid is based on they're submitting unit costs based on the quantities that are provided in their bid form. Their bid does not have a contingency submitted with the bid. The contingency is measured as essentially reserves that we have in order to cover either changes, and changes may be change in scope. So if there's different project components that you would like to add during the course of the project, contingency can cover that. Contingency can also cover changes in the quantities themselves, right? So for example, if the bid has X number of feet of, say, silt fence, but then when you're out there measuring, if it's X plus some number, that's a change in quantity and they get paid based on the unit cost. So your contingency may cover some of the differences in quantities. So in terms of budgeting, I think that's a question I defer.
I was gonna say, so it would be, the bid costs plus any potential changes or contingency is in what we budget for the project.
That's what I
Yeah.
just wanted to double check. So
Yeah.
I can't remember how much we budget. I thought it was around 10%.
The 692 included
Included.
contingency originally.
Or
Is your question, are we going to
What I'm trying to,
adjust that contingency to the 458?
that's my
Is
question.
that the question?
Yes. Because if it's 10%, it's not nothing, but it's like going from 69% to 40, 69,000, 45,000. I'm just curious.
Yeah, so I think.
So
Oh,
I'm
go
gonna
ahead.
jump in
Yeah,
real quick. So the term contingency, I think, can be used as a general term to cover reserves. And so in the engineer's estimate, when we use the term contingency in our kind of engineer's estimate, we're using that term there to cover the uncertainty that we have in how the contractor is estimating labor costs, which we don't have a control over, or we're accounting for some of the uncertainties maybe in their unit prices as markets fluctuate, as they're bidding different projects. So that's how we're using contingency to kind of where it's not directly tied to a specific line item, but it's more broadly spread over the project. Whereas
I think what just throws my red flag is it is quite low. You feel comfortable with it. They feel comfortable with it. That's a great thing. But in this particular instance, for my day job, what I have noticed is when things come in really low, they don't always hit that number. And so I'm just trying to make sure, I know we have contingency funding. I know we typically cover it. We'll judge it per change order. That makes a lot of sense, but I was curious in a budgeting standpoint, do we just say, okay, well, this is a good one. Why don't we budget this much is how much we think it might be? Do we do that?
So what we did is, so for our 2024 budget, we have Pioneer Park Stormwater Reuse, $700,000. And so
That's
that's
what I was
based
curious
on what our engineers are telling us
Yeah,
is
yeah,
their estimated cost, right? So then we round that to an even number. So we have $700,000 allocated loosely, you know, in our targeted retrofit.
That's what I wanted to double check on. So we did
Yeah.
it against the engineer's opinion. And
Yeah.
so now we'll, as we go through and look at the levy, we'll talk about how much of that do we actually continue to allocate through.
Right, and how much you wanna have for, I mean, typically, because that target retrofit is a pot of money that we're using for
Yeah.
different projects, we don't necessarily change it per project, but I think as we're looking at change orders, we would definitely make sure that we're staying under our budgeted amount for that project.
That's what I was curious about.
Yep.
All in favor, say aye.
I,
Okay, moving forward to Roosevelt Homes project to bid.
So Roosevelt Homes, this came to the board 2 months ago. And the reason that this one had that extra month delay was at that point in time, we were also working through the process with the city's review process. For this project, we received three bids on this project. The lowest one being from Fitzgerald Excavating. You can see there, this one also came in quite a bit lower than the engineers.
47%. Yeah.
The reason for that was, well, there's 2 reasons for that. Number one was because during the city's review process, there was a couple of project elements that got removed from the project. So in particular, there was some storm sewer pipes that got removed. We didn't need to make a connection to a manhole that had been in that previous estimate. So that would have brought the cost down somewhat. Even still, the Fitzgerald estimate was quite a bit lower than what our estimate had been. Fitzgerald Excavating is a company that the watershed has worked with in the past on previous CIP projects, so they're familiar with us. We're familiar with them. If you do decide to accept this price, this work is phase 1 of 3. So this project includes the grading for these 2 basins and then the connections to the existing storm sewer system. This work would be wrapped up here by the middle of December. So it would have a quick start, and then it would be wrapped up here before that end of the year.
those subsequent phases would be brought forth as separate projects that would have their own bids.
That's correct. Yep, that's correct. Phase 2, it consists primarily of native plantings for these plantings for these basins and that steep hillside that we saw on the tour. And then phase 3 would consist of really drainage improvements, but improving the overland flow swale drainage from the parking lot past the playground area into the larger basin that is constructed here as part of phase 1. And yes, those would come as separate packages.
And time-wise, they're likely to be.
Time-wise, the design and coordination for phase 2 would be happening this winter with the intent that the plantings would happen in the spring because these basins would be part of that phase 2. Phase 3 is a little bit more undefined, but I would anticipate that the design and coordination with the property owner would happen early in 2024, with construction possibly later in 2024 or beyond, in the following year. The reason that it's a little bit undefined at this point is we're trying to coordinate that work with the property owner's plans for improvements in the playground area, improvements in their site. So that way we disturb that common area one time and take care of everything at once.
Thank you.
And just to double check, I think I heard you say the scope change would have reduced the engineer's opinion, maybe not to 70K.
But it would not have gone to 70K. It would have been closer to about 100,000. About ballpark. That said, Fitzgerald's number that came in was even lower than the engineer's opinion.
We're saving some money. I move we accept the bids and award the Pioneer Park reuse project to Fitzgerald's Excavating. Is that the wrong name though?
I forgot to change the name on that.
To the
Girls
correct
Alone.
name, to Fitzgerald Excavating and Trucking Incorporated, direct staff to prepare and mail notice of award and prepare the agreements and do the required submittals.
Second it.
Copy and paste was best.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Hey, lastly, CIP maintenance and repair. Approval plans and authorization to advertise for bids.
All right,
Okay.
next one up here. So this one now is, we're looking for your direction to go and request bids for the 2024 CIP project. What's included in the packet here is a summary of anticipated cost breakdown. This is kind of by site. With that, of the 9 different sites that are listed there, there is one site that would be where the district would be reimbursed for those costs by the county. Because we've talked about contingency on this one, I do want to point out that this one does have a contingency of 20% relative to the contingencies of 10% for the other 2 projects. The reason you're seeing the higher contingency for this particular project is with the other 2 sites, they were contained in one area. The work was, the construction limits was very well defined. By nature here, this project is distributed to a number of different sites. Over the years, requests have tended to come up to where a little bit more material might need to be removed, or there's potential for a little bit more uncertainty in some of the quantities that go in there, and so there is a higher contingency that is used for this particular project. Again, there's 9 sites. I'm happy to walk through the sites one by one if you would like. I'm seeing some head shaking there, so I will just pause and see if there are any questions. Happy to go into further details.
We have a ranking process for the CIP. We talked about it a few times. I personally am comfortable with the ones as they bubble to the top. But I do know Ben and Mark, y'all are new to this CIP process. Feel free to don't take Cam and I's experiences as for granted, so feel free to ask.
I consider that somewhat of a broader conversation that'll come forward, I'm comfortable with these projects. I don't know what other projects might be further down in the priority ranking, but I guess I'd say I'm comfortable with the concept and price and costs of these projects, and that they're distributed around the district. It seems like no issues.
My only question is on these maintenance ramps, essentially boat ramps. The cost to me, I recently have bid out a similar project and I saw much higher prices coming back with the same product that you spec. So I'm just wondering how confident you are in those prices.
Yeah, I don't have the specific unit costs breakdown here, but I know that I know that we were reviewing the similar plans for a boat ramp that the county had put in recently. I don't know if we've got those unit prices or not, but I'll double check those.
Yeah, that was my only real comment, I guess. Per our previous conversation before the meeting, just to disclose, I do work for Ramsey County Parks and Recreation. A number of these projects are occurring on county property. I am not a manager of any of them or have any active role in these, so just to disclose that before we make any further decisions.
I'll go ahead and approve or move that we approve the preliminary design estimated costs and proposed project schedule and direct staff to finalize the design and bidding documents and advertise the project for bid.
I will second that motion. You've done a nice job of summarizing that.
Well, that's only because somebody, Tina, has like spelled it out for us. So just so you know,
Write it out.
you didn't have to read what you wrote if you haven't already seen that. It's nice that you know. Thank you, Tina.
My only, Any discussion? I do think that the CIP process is fairly thorough, and I do like the distribution. I don't remember if we've written that down somewhere on how we approach CIP selection. I know we have.
Through the prioritization, you mean? Or
Yeah,
through
I was just thinking for as new board members come on, I know Pam is going to have someone try to fill her shoes, and it'd be nice to be like, hey, this is how we go about it, so then they can come informed
Sure.
as well. That's just
Sure.
a separate thing, but.
Yeah.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Attorney report, Tracy.
Yeah, thank you. Had kind of a busy month. Lauren's been active in taking the lead on obtaining an easement for the Fish Creek project. And I've been working with Nicole to make sure the development where the original permit holder for our permit has left the project, and we're working on making sure that gets transferred appropriately to, I think, an investor of that project. White Bear Lake is working with them, and I've started communication with them. So I hope in the next couple of weeks, we'll have a new permit holder for that project and we can be protected with that. So those are the couple of major things we've been working on. I expect now we'll be looking at bid and bid documents and project documents coming up, but that's what's happened this month.
Awesome. Thank you, Tracy. Any questions for Tracy? Thank you.
Great. Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, board discussion topics. I am going to pause on that because Tina has a couple of things in the administrative report that I'm going to bring up for discussion at that point in time. So let's go ahead and jump to the new reports and or presentations. For the water monitoring intern experience presentation, Nick. I get to
Hello.
listen to you. You've been so patiently waiting.
I know. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's good to hear. I'm glad to hear that. But yeah, let me grab it here quick. Sure. And then go to slideshow. Can you see that all right?
Yep, looks good.
Awesome. So I'm Nick. I'm the 2023 water quality intern. I work under Eric, who's the water monitoring coordinator, as well as I work under Kyle and Lindsay, who are the water monitoring technicians. And here is just my overview of my season at Ramsey-Washington Metro Watershed District. So there's many duties that the water quality intern does. I can think about 20, but I feel like these are the most important 5 out of all the duties that I do here at Ramsey-Washington Metro Watershed District. That includes trash racking, compositing ISCO samplers, conducting pond, stream, and lake sampling, as well as taking stream and flow measurements and gathering data. So first off is trash racking. Trash racking is an action in which a person goes out and clean outlets and inlets of lakes and streams. So in turn, that keeps water from being obstructed in these trash racks, as well as, most importantly, it mitigates flooding. So in our district, we have roughly about 120 trash racks throughout. Every week, we routinely check about 12 to 14 of them because those are the trash racks that get obstructed the most, and we want to make sure they are clean and not obstructed, because last thing you want is a trash rack to be obstructed and then flood the surrounding area. So here is one of our trash racks. It is actually located at Jarvis Mill Pond, which is actually right next to our office here. As you can see on the left side picture, it is covered in aquatic vegetation, sticks, wood, and as you can tell, there's no flow in that picture. And because of that, the water has risen higher than it needs to. So moving on to the next picture, which is the right side. As you can tell, after the cleaning of the trash rack, there's no debris. There is free flow of water going into the trash rack. And as you can tell, the water level has actually dropped because of that. So because of trash racking, it mitigates flooding throughout the district, and we don't want flooding, of course. That's the most important thing for trash racking. Next thing, the next important duty that the water quality intern does is checking ISCO samplers. ISCO samplers are a scientific instrument that can hold and capture water from a rain event. They are used to capture water in real time. So some examples will be like storm events, rain events, or even just a rise in streams or rivers. It will notice and it will start capturing water during those periods. Then those water samples are captured, they are bottled up and brought to a lab for analysis of nutrients. And some of those nutrients that we look for are phosphorus, chloride, and nitrogen. So we have, this year, we had 12 different sites. We have 4 in our southern part of our district, which is below 94. We have several in our central part of our district, which is between 694 and 94 on the map. And as well, we have 1 site in our north part of our district, which is in Shoreview, just north of 694. So these are some of our sites throughout our district. We got 1 at Shoreview Commons Pond in Shoreview. As for our central region sites, we have several of them. Those include the Wakefield Pond. We have 1 at the Frostkin Spent Lime Chamber. We also got 1 at a rain garden at the Maplewood Mall. We also got 1 site at the Iron Sand Filter. We also got them at the Jarvis Creek, Coleman Creek, as well at Beaver Lake at one of the inlets. As for the southern sites, we have them at Fish Creek, then Battle Creek. We also got 1 at the Beltline Interceptor, as well as we got 1 at the Elm Treatment Facility. So that is all of our sites throughout our district. Here is a picture of one of our sampling sites. This is actually located at Battle Creek. As you can see, the ISCO sampler is actually attached to a battery because we don't have an external power source to power the ISCO sampler. So this is actually our 6700 series ISCO sampler. It is actually one of our older ones in our here at the district. And how it works is that there's a tube that goes into the ISCO sampler, and then there's an outlet that goes to a post in the water. Then there is actually another line that goes from the ISCO sampler to the water, and that shoots out little air bubbles every few seconds, and that will monitor the level of the stream. So once it realizes there is a rise in water, it will tell the ISCO sampler to start triggering, and what that is, it starts pumping water from the stream into the ISCO sampler, and then from there it collects water into bottles within the ISCO sampler itself. So that is how our samples actually work at our sites. Moving on, another important duty. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but so those are event-based. There's no periodic checking if we haven't had any events. Or do you only visit the samplers following an event?
So they're almost event-based. We go out after storm events, rain events. Sometimes we'll actually, because of trash racking, they will actually trigger. So we will have to actually go out and empty them because of that. Because of that, they didn't capture rain or rain. So the whole point of these ISCO samplers is to capture rain. So we do go check them after events, and sometimes we will have to check them too after cleaning trash racks. So yes, they're primarily almost based on rain events. So yeah.
So you might be visiting them almost every other week or so.
Yeah, just about. I know this season has been a pretty dry season for rain, especially during the summertime, but during a normal year, Eric and the rest of the people in the water quality department told me they would almost go check them almost every single week, actually, or about maybe every few days, actually, for that case.
Thank you.
Yeah. So moving on, another important duty as a water quality intern that I do is lake, pond, and stream sampling. So pond, lake, and stream sampling are good ways to find impairment of bodies of water. There's a few different ways that we can actually capture the water. One of the ways are using a Kenner deep water sampler. That is what you see on the picture of the right. It is a cylindrical instrument that has 2 caps on it. So you lower that into the water column. Once you're at the right, that's where you want to capture the water. you send a weight down and it will trigger a button on top of the instrument, and that will close the caps and thus capturing the water. Another way we capture water is using a PVC tube. It's a 2 meter long tube, and we primarily use that to capture the first 2 meters of water in the water column. And as well, the last way we can capture water is using a manual grab sample, and that's just taking a bottle or like a container and taking surface water sample. So then after capturing the water, the water is then bottled up and brought to a lab for analysis, looking for nutrients, again, looking for phosphorus, chloride, and nitrogen. So we have quite a few sites that we check throughout the season. We have three routine lakes that we check, as well as 5 streams and then 6 routine ponds. The pictures that you see on the slide are actually the lakes that we check every other week during the summer. The bottom left picture is actually a picture of it's a picture of Battle Lake or Battle Creek Lake. The top right picture is a picture of Tanner's Lake, and then the bottom right picture is actually a picture of Carver's Lake. So those are the lakes that we routinely check every other week during the summer. Some of the other sites that we check for streams are Battle Creek, Fish Creek, Beltline Interceptor, Jarvis Creek, and then Coleman Creek. And as well for the ponds that we check routinely. And again, that's every other week. That is Jarvis Mill Pond, Market Pond, Wakefield Pond, Coleman Basin, and Casey Lake. Also Carver Pond too as well. So here's a few pictures from our season of sampling. Bottom left picture is actually of us chloride sampling right after ice out earlier on in the spring, and what we're checking for is for excess chlorides, especially after a bunch of salt that's been applied to the roadways of Minnesota. We just want to check if there's any excess salt that gets pushed into these ponds and lakes. And then the right side picture is actually of us sampling at Jarvis Mill Pond. We usually check this body of water about every month for the most part during the season. So yeah. Moving on, another important duty of our water quality intern is doing stream flow measurements. So the data is taken with an instrument called the Flow Tracker 2. You will see a picture of that on the next slide. What it does is that it takes multiple points of data to get average reading of discharge, and the unit that it takes data in is cubic feet per second. And then that flow data is used to get understanding of how a stream or river is acting. So actually, then that data can potentially predict future low and high water events from how water acts from year to year. So here's some pictures from this year of us doing stream flow measurements. The picture on the left is actually me stream flow measuring at Fish Creek. We usually did stream flow measurements about every month. So as you can see, it is the handheld device is actually attached to a pole, which then is attached. And then at the bottom of the pole, there's actually a little sensor, and that sensor is what detects flow. And then once it starts detecting flow, all that data is then pushed into our instrument, which you can see on the right side picture. That is the Flow Tracker 2. And then it will show you the discharge as you're taking points during the stream flow measurement event. So moving on, another really important duty that the water quality intern does is gathering data. Data is the most important aspect of any scientific field. Data must be accurate to convey accurate results. From those results, you can actually analyze trends, which can be important in decision-making funding. So some examples would be water treatment, as well as improved water infrastructure. As for water treatments, I just want to go over one example, and that is our alum treatment facility. So back long ago, there's this lake called Tanner's Lake in our district. It was once impaired for nutrients. So what we did is that we went out, we sampled, and we found trends of impairness. And then it was decided to come up with a plan to fix it. So because of that plan, and and us going out to sample it, it showed that it was impaired, so we decided to build an alum treatment plant to treat the lake. And now, as actually it's been, I think, about 15 years or something along that lines, it actually has shown better water quality since then. And for some examples of improved water infrastructure in our district, some examples would be the iron sand filter next to Costco and Maplewood, or our spent lime filter that is located on the intersection of Kennard and Frost and Maplewood as well. So here's a picture of me and Lindsay from our Shoreview sampling site this year. We have two different, we have two ISCOs at this location, one at the inlet and one at the outlet. What they do is they check for water level events. So the ISCO will record those water level events throughout the season. So then we come to these sites and we download data for those water level events, and we usually go to these sites and download about every 2 weeks to gather data.
What does Lindsay do?
Is Lindsay shielding you from rain, maybe? I don't.
Yeah, she's yeah, that day was kind of raining, so she was shielding me and the computer from the rain from getting wet. Yeah.
Protecting the
Yeah, yeah.
computer, right?
Yeah, not
Yeah,
you, but the
protecting-
computer.
Yep, most importantly, the computer, yep. So in conclusion, all duties performed by the intern helps bring better quality of life to the district, which includes better recreation. And some examples of that would be fishing and swimming, as well as better protection, and that is land, property, and life. Of course, most importantly, better quality of water. So as a district, that's what we want for all of our people within our watershed. So with the intern's many tasks, it contributes to our motto of quality water for quality life. Before I conclude this presentation, I just want to go over some memorable moments from this year that I thought was really cool. So some memorable moments I thought that were cool is learning new instruments, methodologies, and applications. So some examples of that would be sediment coring, using the flow meter and SON instruments, as well as using the FlowLink application. Another memorable moment I thought was really cool is entering the Beltline Interceptor Storm Tunnel. It's cool to see that many people don't go in every single day to see how it works. It's really cool to see how water flows from Fayetteville into the Mississippi River. So I thought that was really interesting. So another interesting that happened that we all know was the Beltline Interceptor sinkhole. Even though that was a bad thing that happened, it was really cool to see how our water district responds to an event like that. And of course, the most memorable moment I saw from this year was actually attending the Water Resources Conference. I feel like every intern should have the chance to go to a conference like that. So it was really cool to see what other people and agencies are doing to better Minnesota's waters. There's quite a few talks that I went to during the Water Resources Conference, but the one that stand out to me the most was actually one by the Minnesota Department of Health. Their talk was called the Statewide PFAS Testing Initiative at the Minnesota Department of Health, and it was cool to see what they're doing to treat the PFAS throughout the region of Minnesota, especially particularly in East Metro, where PFAS is kind of found at. So these are just some memorable moments I thought that were cool from this year. So this is my end of my presentation. I want to say thank you for taking the time to listen about my year as a water quality intern. If you have any questions, you're more than welcome to ask. And I just want to say thank you all for listening in. That's it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
Hey, Nick, what's your next
Yeah.
stop? You know,
Pardon me?
what's your next stop? You know, are you back to school or under?
So actually I've been out of school for 3 years, actually. So I've been just kind of doing seasonal jobs for the last 3 years. So I'm hoping that next year with all the experience I've gotten from all the seasonal jobs, will hopefully land me a full-time job. So that's what I'm kind of looking forward to next year. So
Cool, good luck.
yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that.
Thanks, Nick.
Good job, man.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that.
I always like those. You did well.
Yeah, nice job.
Watershed management plan gap summary.
This was a doozy one. Dense table.
Yes, so Greg Williams is here. Greg was here not that long ago. A few months ago now. But welcome.
Thank you.
I'll let you just dive right in.
Sure. Okay. As you know, you have a watershed management plan. It's a very thick document. It helps provide guidance for your priorities, activities, and projects over a 10-year period. You are inching towards the period of time when you'll have to update that for the next 10-year period. And one of the things that we recommend doing as a first step in that is we refer to it as gaps analysis, but it's just a look at your existing plan relative to kind of the overall surface water watershed management environment. Now, whether that's changes in state regulations, changes in partner plans, changes in kind of the social landscape of what the priorities are. And the idea is that this isn't necessarily to make any decisions yet, but to identify maybe some pinch points that might require a little bit more focus or emphasis, might result in more discussion or analysis as you go through the planning process. And that's what we did here. We reviewed your plan relative to your annual report, which is a little bit of a better indication of what you're currently doing. And the plan was written from 2015 to 2017. It's the best idea at the time, but it doesn't necessarily reflect how you guys have evolved since then. We will also look at it relative to your rules, partner plans like the Washington County Groundwater Plan. We looked at 6 of your larger cities, Maplewood, North St. Paul, Oakdale, Roseville, Shoreview, St. Paul, and Woodbury. And also just state regulations. And this table is organized into multiple columns, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but basically the idea is that each row is a topic that we looked at. There's a column that summarizes how it's addressed either in your current practice or your current plan, how the cities address this topic, what expectations there are from other partners or external agencies, things like PCA or DNR, where we see that there might be a gap, and then for reference, just briefly some examples of what other watersheds have done or are doing relative to this gap. Some of these are things that we fully expect to update through the plan process, and they're just noted here so that we don't lose track of them. But I think I will call your attention to a few highlights of things that we identified through this assessment. Oh, and the gaps in here, they're categorized. The first, maybe about half of them are what I'll call natural resource issues. They're very focused on kind of the science of things. The next group is what we call operational issues, kind of how you do your work. And then the last 3 are just related to the actual plan document itself. The first one that I'll call out is chloride. Chloride was an emerging issue, I'll say, in the last plan update. Waters of the state had been listed as impaired for chloride at the time. Your existing plan does identify chloride impairments, but the Twin City TMDL, the metro area TMDL, had just been published. There was some uncertainty in terms of how cities and organizations like yours were going to address the impairment. And so obviously you haven't ignored chloride since your plan was adopted. You've done educational elements in coordination with cities. But as it's written right now in your plan, you have an action item to assist local communities in implementing projects or other management actions. And projects and other management actions is a little bit vague. And so the plan development is an opportunity to kind of more specifically assess what that role is for the district, if there is a role, and how you might be able to support those member cities. Just kind of document where you're at and where you'd like to go in the future. Also a chance to revisit whether there's anything from a regulatory standpoint that makes sense to do, since your current iteration of your rules don't address chlorides. PFAS is another, or perfluorochlorinated chemicals, whatever. PFAS. Yeah, that was, again, the chemicals were there, but nobody really knew about them or talked about them at the time. But that is an issue with respect to groundwater contamination for several communities within the watershed. You don't have a particularly active groundwater management role, but that's not necessarily, you're not prevented from having one or altering or expanding or changing your groundwater management role. So plan development is just kind of an opportunity to, again, think about that issue and how it affects your member cities and whether or not that's something you want to get involved in. Also, the next one is infiltration as a stormwater management practice. Your plan and your rules highly prioritize infiltration as a stormwater treatment practice. It's based on MIDS, which most, if not all, of the watershed in the metro area have adopted. In the most recent iteration of the construction stormwater permit, there were some changes to the restrictions where areas where infiltration is either not permitted or permitted only with certain engineering caveats. And so, you know, that's something where you may want to just kind of reevaluate, are there alternatives to infiltration that weren't emphasized enough in the plan that you want to further emphasize? There is data that's presented in the plan with respect to priority infiltration areas and other areas where infiltration might adversely affect groundwater levels, but it doesn't focus particularly on water quality. And so that's something else you could consider, is whether or not those resources should be updated for contamination concerns. Climate resilience is a big one where it, again, with your plan was, we started writing it only halfway through the wettest decade on record. And then now we'll start writing this one probably a few years into it, ongoing drought conditions, so October notwithstanding. But so the plan, since then, you've done the Beltline resilience study and looked at other ways in which you've responded to climate resilience concerns. And the plan update is an opportunity to incorporate the elements from that Beltline study and other adjacent studies into the plan. And especially with respect to whether or not there are capital improvements that you want to make to address potential flooding issues that might be exacerbated with future climate trends. Increasing operation and BMP maintenance needs. Your plan is pretty detailed about the CIP maintenance program, but I think since the plan was adopted, you've expanded that program to start doing O&M for cities at the request, right? You bill them back. So that practice should be incorporated into the plan. But it's also, plan might be an opportunity to kind of take stock of where that program is at and see about whether it's working and what elements are working well. A couple of kind of state dictated changes. The last time the plan was being updated was right around the time that the state was updating its statutes and rules regarding watershed management. And so this plan was adopted under kind of it was sort of grandfathered in that the plan update process was started before those rules were adopted. Those rules now really heavily emphasize measurability of goals, really looking at metrics and quantitative elements. The goals that are in the plan right now are pretty broad and fairly vague with respect to targets. The watershed does do quite a bit in reporting actual progress in terms of pounds of phosphorus reduced to impaired water bodies and things like that. But incorporating those into the goal statements is gonna be a point of emphasis for the Board of Water and Soil Resources. That doesn't mean everything needs to be explicitly measurable, but I think they'll be looking for more of that in the next plan update. And that's also related to a new requirement for biennial progress assessment. So relative to those quantitative goals, they're gonna be looking for reports of progress towards those goals. Project prioritization is another thing that you may want to emphasize in the plan update. I know since the 2017 plan, you guys have accomplished a whole lot of things, and the list of to-dos has actually dwindled quite a bit. So developing a prioritized capital improvement program is something that you may need to spend a little bit more time doing in order to create a menu of what you want to tackle over the next 10 years. It's also a chance to revisit what factors are important in prioritizing those projects, whether that looks, specifically at targeted sub-watersheds versus watershed-wide. What pollutants are you looking at? What recreational uses or socioeconomic factors are to be included in that prioritization? So just revisiting that project prioritization framework. And then diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's a topic that is maybe in more to the forefront in terms of organizations these days than when the last plan was updated. Your 2017 plan doesn't specifically mention diversity, equity, or inclusion, although I know since then the district has considered how some of those factors influence your decisions. And the plan update process is again an opportunity to determine whether or not any of that works into how you prioritize projects or programs, and to what degree. There are lots of different data sets that have been developed since the plan was adopted related to population vulnerabilities and things like that, equity concerns that could be incorporated as part of the plan update, or at least considered. Those are maybe the hottest topics, I guess, to consider as part of the plan update process. There are a few more that are described in here, but those are the ones that I think are maybe the most key.
When's it best to react to this type of information as a board? Like, it's very good, it was thorough, I appreciated the comparison to other ones, that was really helpful. I'm trying to figure out at what point do we start taking action? Discussions start next year, if I remember.
For the topics, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, one of our next tasks will be to scope out our process for the actual plan update. Some of it will start with, engagement with community engagement, board engagement. We'll start kind of big.
Yeah.
And work our way into these more specific topics.
Yeah, because there's definitely some ones here that I don't know the plan intimately, but there are definitely some areas here that really resonate with me, and areas that I knew were gaps, or changes, I should say that, changes that we've made.
Yeah, I think when you're scoping the plan update in more detail, there are different ways you could tackle these issues. Kind of at the very least, it's like including these just kind of as bulleted items to note as you get through kind of the more standard steps in plan development. Alternatively, you could identify a subset of these as, key or complex issues and kind of dedicate a portion of the scope to addressing those, whether it's through more focused engagement, partner engagement, or in the case of some of the more technically focused ones, it could actually be targeted studies or things that might fall outside the quote unquote normal plan update effort.
Yeah, so I like the idea of prioritization, which I was assuming that we're not doing tonight in terms of going through this list and doing prioritization.
Informational at this point.
Because I really like there are some like obvious must-dos, DEI, feels like that's just like there's not, but there's other ones that we need discussion prioritization around. I'd rather keep a narrow focus, but that'll come when we do the planning pieces of it. I don't know when that happens.
Well, so yeah, these are items as what the next thing you'll see regarding the plan update, I'm assuming, is a scope and like schedule for how this plan update's gonna look. And then we can outline you know, what engagement means, who we're engaging to, how the board will probably plan out board workshops, you know,
Yeah.
at certain points. Like I said, we'll start big, we'll probably start with, if I'm wrong, but, you know, start with, what does this plan look like? You know, what do you want this plan to be? How is it gonna serve our communities and our residents? And then, you know, it'll be pretty far in the process before you'll be reacting to,
Okay.
you know, what the plan says about climate resiliency, you know, like that'll be.
Yeah.
But I think that some of these prioritized topics, let's say, or hot topics, I could see a more focused discussion with the board on.
Yeah.
But you know, we're still 3 years out. 3 years out for, you know, plan approval, so we have some time.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that it's good that we saw it first here. I don't want to lose the information.
Yeah,
So it's just
no,
making
it'll-
sure that it's clear. So
Yeah.
if there's a way to like keep a repository of like, here's this, let's remember, I'd rather it not be, let's remember November 1st, we went through all this stuff, right? Like, if there's a way to capture it. in a
No, it
meaningful way.
definitely will be in front of you.
Yeah,
multiple times,
consistently, yeah.
I think, and, you know, this was really helpful for us and for BAR as they're, like I said, scoping out kind of what this looks like. How many of these big things are there? You know, what is it gonna take to address the gaps, but also the update?
Is there a reaction you need from the board tonight to help with the planning process as you go through this with the information contained today? Like with the information you presented today, is there any reaction you need from us to help you plan through the next 3 years? I assume not.
I mean, to me, there's nothing shocking in here, but if there was anything in here that you were like, oh, I didn't expect to see that, or maybe there's something else that you're like, oh, what about this? You know, if you have any of those at this point, we could take them, but otherwise it's more informational.
Now, the devil's in the details on a couple of them I did not see.
The only general thing for me would be like, I know 10 years ago, you maybe didn't do as much, but what your community action plan and engagement plan looks like. I know that's becoming more of a hot button issue. People want to be involved, people want to respond, especially with something like a watershed district where people are, you know, we are taxing authority. It'd be nice to at some point see this is our plan, you know, because we are here to carry this work out on behalf of the community. Getting that feedback, I think, is essential.
Yeah.
Do you feel like it wasn't captured in the public involvement and education section?
No, I do feel like it was captured. I'm just like,
Oh,
as
that-
we get
that-
further, seeing like,
Yeah.
like that is a specific item.
That would
I
be a
guess
good
this is maybe
detail
not
one.
the time to call that out because you held some comments, but yeah.
Yeah, I think.
No,
that-
it's good.
And one of the things staff will be talking with BAR staff about too, is what does the plan development engagement look
Yeah.
like? And then, like you said, even after the plan is approved, what is our engagement? We had a pretty, I would say, fairly involved public engagement process for the last plan that I thought was really useful, but I know that there's some late into that process.
Yeah, I want to just thank you. I thought this was an excellent.
I did too. I
analysis.
thought it was very.
Thanks.
There are a number of things, when it just sort of, popped into this is what it's about, that I was thinking, oh, we should probably see it. Yeah, it's there, it's there, it's there. So we covered all the bases. Thank you.
The key is remembering that we have this document as we get.
That's the
Yeah.
point I was gonna make.
It's included in the link to it, maybe is included on the map. The link.
It would be nice to separate this out as a separate report is where I was really driving is like, oh man, this gap assessments, if we could put that in our document library separate from the November 1st, that would be very helpful. That'd be my
I think
preference.
Maybe we'll talk too about having for the planning process, having some sort of intranet.
Yeah, some folder
Yeah, I
or
mean,
something.
So access for you and for attack and for, you know, places where people can find that.
Not appropriate tonight. I'll just throw out, there does seem to be a trend away from kind of traditional documents.
Mhm. Yeah,
And,
for
you
the
know,
plan
so
itself, yeah.
a lot more electronic, you know, searching and high level and, yeah, this is
Wiki
like,
level kind of,
yeah, exactly. This is a, I would really support this being out there as a addendum to the existing plan and just, get some reaction to it.
Yeah, I've got some
Let's hear
thoughts too about like what that plan looks like, you know, like
Yeah.
how people use it. And I think there's a lot we can do with that.
You have succeeded in making me read something almost 3 times. Really well done.
And Greg was integral in our writing of our last plan, and I'm really glad that you're with us again. You'll hear it again.
For this one too.
Yeah. Yes.
How does find a gap analyzer?
How did you hone that skill?
I don't know. Maybe, I think I've stepped in that gap, but during plan development, and I was like, okay, I better look for these ahead of time.
Dare,
It's right on my plans.
dare I ask? I mean, I'm suspecting this is not the only plan you've been involved with, so, you've seen these kinds of things and done these kinds of things before.
Yeah. We earlier this year did a similar analysis for South Washington Watershed District, because they're about to start their plan update.
Thank you, Greg, so much.
Thank you very much.
Let's transition to the Beltline Mississippi evaluation report. This one. You, Brandon.
Okay. So this one, I saw the reaction from Nick's presentation here. Everyone's familiar with the Beltline tunnel. Hopefully not so familiar with this particular section. It's really, you're familiar with it, but hopefully haven't been in it. It's being in the tunnel in this location is a little bit more treacherous when you're so close to the river. So this summer there was a failure of the tunnel there, both in terms of a pipe deformation and also a joint separation. So there was an emergency repair that was done this summer. That emergency repair was really temporary in nature. Temporary meaning not necessarily days or months, but it's not a permanent fix that we can just then walk away from. And so this report looked at different alternatives for a more permanent fix. What needs to be done to restore, repair this section of tunnel such that we've got confidence that it'll continue to convey flows from, 2/3 of the watershed to the river. So the way that the report is laid out, we provided just a brief introduction in section 1. Section 2, we looked at the hydraulic design criteria. We were trying to establish what's the criteria that any type of option would need to meet in order to not make conditions worse upstream of where this repair was occurring. And really the key conclusion from that hydraulic analysis is that we can't reduce the cross-sectional area. We can't reduce the capacity of the tunnel here without affecting upstream water surface levels. You can increase it. You might have an incremental benefit upstream. It won't propagate upstream. So the benefits would be local, but we certainly can't decrease it without causing impacts on property upstream. So with that in mind, then we started looking at different alternatives. And that's where section 3 lays out really 2 different kinds of alternatives. One we're calling in-pipe repairs. So in-pipe repairs, we're going to leave that old steel pipe in place, and we're going to do something inside the pipe. And there's 2 types of in-pipe repairs. One is structural and one's non-structural. So non-structural is just kind of a liner of some sort, a thin liner, whereas a structural is more of a thicker pipe inside of a pipe. And the general summary there is that when you're doing something inside of a pipe, but you can't reduce the cross-sectional area, they fall off the table pretty quickly. And we realize that there's a number of different types of technology and terms for those types of repairs. So within that section, there's a number of just photographs to help you see, okay, if we were to pick one of these options, this is what construction might or could look like. So the second one, alternative was really excavate and replace. So dig up the old pipe, pull it out of the ground and put something new in. And we looked at a few different geometries, sizes of pipe, and we also looked at a couple of different, we also tried to lay out at a high level what the considerations would be there. And so with that, we were kind of dialing in on about one or two different sizes, either a concrete pipe of a similar diameter or a box culvert with a kind of similar shape. You can go 8x8 box or a 9-foot concrete pipe were the two alternatives we were looking at there.
Sounds expensive.
Those, we'll get to the cost. Those we were narrowing in on. We were looking at concrete because of where it is relative to the river. It will be really standing water in the bottom of this pipe for a constant period of time. So we wanted to move away from a steel type of material. We also have very limited cover above the pipe in this area. And so we were kind of limited to the change, the increase in diameter or height of the box culvert that could be considered. So with that, then the section 4 really kind of goes into next steps and outlines pre-design activities, site characterization, investigation activities, permitting, and then eventually into final design. And at the end of that section 4, there is a table, that table 4.1, that lays out what that cost is, what the estimated cost is at this point for really going from pre-design through final design, bidding, construction administration, and then we also have a very high level estimate for construction costs in there. So
And that was for 70 feet of pipe?
for about 70 feet of pipe. Yeah.
And were you doing it didn't matter what type of concrete reinforced pipe?
So at this level, for those two, they're very similar costs, where by the time we start rounding the numbers, it's kind of applying the contingency range. We could go either one here. And so during the pre-design activity, that's one of the decisions we would look at making. And there's a few things that will go into that decision. Again, I mentioned one is the cover of the pipe. The other thing that is going to be have to be considered carefully is coordination with the port authority and how the pipe ties into the river wall. So we own and maintain the tunnel, the pipe. We don't own the river wall. So we need to make sure that our pipe ties into the river wall in a way that doesn't damage or create impacts to that structure that's there. And so there's an opening right now, kind of a square opening, and so those pipes are sizes that kind of align with what's there. There's certainly the coordination of the port authority to make that connection.
Can I ask you a question on the section 2 real quick on the hydrology? Yeah. So just provocatively, it seems like with the new 100-year floodplain and some of the modeling work, because I assume you use, can't remember what your rain model is Atlas 14. Yeah, and you're going to upgrade to 15, and we're seeing higher fluctuations with water. I would venture to say that maybe the current size is not sufficient, even at all. That's kind of what some of the numbers were starting to lead me down. So even with inserts, although I do believe that they would be cheaper, it doesn't seem like at all feasible given where our current existing performance is compared to when the overflows were.
Yeah. So within that section 2, you're right in terms of what the inserts are. That there's two tables there, table 2.1 and table 2.2, and in there the numbers, some of them show up as red. The red numbers are locations where the tunnel surcharges and you get water on the surface. And so some of those locations are areas of property that we don't own. So we gotta be really careful that we don't make those locations worse in particular.
Yeah.
The red bold numbers are the ones then that get to your point where when you see those bold numbers, now we're making things worse above the ground. In terms of the long-term size of the tunnel, flows through this section of tunnel are limited at this point by the upstream tunnel, right? The tunnel is the restriction here.
Making it bigger at the bottom is not gonna help the upstream.
That's exactly right. And so you can make it bigger at the bottom, but to realize that benefit, you are talking about chasing that size and increase all the way up, towards Lake Phelan. And now those costs start to balloon and escalate.
But
So-
just to play devil's advocate, it seems like you could get what appears to be a couple feet improvement if you went to something that was bigger than the existing pipe at the 9 and 10 foot area.
Yeah,
Because it would release a little bit faster is kind of what I've concluded from table 2.3. Which makes it seem more appetizing.
yeah. So with table 2.3, the location in the first column there, those labels are the labels that show up on figure 2-2.
Mhm.
Right, so you can see where the benefit is along that pipe alignment and how far that will go upstream. There is the furthest upstream one location is the new relief structure.
Yep.
So when the belt line is at capacity, that's where it surcharges and there's a release of water. We're only going up to that location because once you go upstream of that location, the numbers collapse on themselves and you don't see any benefit really upstream of that location. So you are correct that within that section, if you go bigger, there's some
Minor benefits.
absolutely. And I think as part of the design or pre-design process where we're picking that diameter or that final pipe size, there's the site constraints on one hand that says you can't go any bigger, right? You need a certain amount of cover. You need to be able to fit into this area on one hand. On the other hand, there's these localized benefits that we can start to weigh costs, the incremental cost with the incremental benefits. And we start to zoom in and look at it at that more granular level. And we're not rounding to, 3 or 4 zeros at the end here. Then you can start to weigh those, whether or not going to that bigger pipe size is worth the local benefits you're seeing.
Yeah.
But wouldn't another potential benefit is if we start having decreased storm events, but when they do come, they're increased in volume. So we have increased flooding events happening that we predict in the future by starting out by replacing things bigger or as big as can feasibly fit in there. Then if we need to make things upstream bigger, we've already got at least down there already bigger.
Yeah, right, there is you're building resiliency in the system by if all things equal, picking something with a little bit more capacity. That's one approach. What we wanted to be a little bit careful with when we were kind of providing initial recommendations here is that there's not a long-term plan to upsize or the tunnel, right? And so putting in a really big pipe when there's no long-term plan for the rest of the system, we wanted to be careful about what we were looking there. And so looking at it from these are the site constraints, particularly the amount of cover, kind of gives a reasonable limit on the size of pipe, the upstream or the upper end of the size of pipe that we could consider.
I have another question.
Sure.
So this seems like it's gonna be a big construction extravaganza, and are there, the pipe, when you inspect it, there's lots of areas that look like they're gonna fall to pieces any second. Are there is there an opportunity, since we're doing this ginormous project, to, do another little thing up there that could help us, that we predict we're gonna need in 10 years anyways?
Well, for this particular project and where the work is occurring at one location, you're kind of the costs don't necessarily translate in terms of adding scope, adding repairs in a different location to the tunnel, so it's not necessarily a direct comparison there. I will say though that the tunnel is inspected every 5 years, and so we've got an understanding of how things are changing within that tunnel, so.
And just a reminder that last time we did the 5-year, then we bonded for those repairs. We did about $3 million in repairs upstream of this area. So we do, you know, as come out of those inspections, then we would have other sites where we would.
Have we used insertions or
What's that?
have we used insertions in other parts of the tunnel upstream? Do you know?
In pipe.
Yeah.
Modification.
Yeah, forgive me, in pipe
Yeah.
modification.
I know that there's been grouting done in other parts of the tunnel.
But that's not like that.
Work, there hasn't been.
That's like reduced flow.
That's what I was curious about.
Yeah, we haven't done it.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not steel the entire way either,
Right.
is it? I mean, there's a
Right.
variety of
Material.
material. And some way, I mean, the brick or block, whatever, those probably have more angular space that you have more ability to work. This might be a little bit of a noodling around hope for outcome. I'll ask the question. Both the box culvert and the reinforced concrete got substantive wall thicknesses involved, and we're talking about inches in terms of, obviously, there's gonna be an excavation, there's gonna be a trench, and but are there other materials that we ought to at least consider? And I'm wondering here, plastics, fiberglass, is there a structural integrity from pressures that concrete gives us that some of those other materials might not? I think they would all give a long lasting, no corrosion type outcome. I don't know how cost comparisons are. And I guess related is, I don't know the industry at all, other than to say, gee, I think box culverts, typically are going under a road and might extend, 20 feet or something. You're gonna have to link them together. A concrete reinforced, you may get 2 or 3 sections that you get. I'm just wondering about 70 feet. There's probably no way we can do it in just one run, but by looking at other materials, is there some gain in, the number of joints, if you will?
Yeah. So with box culverts, really or circular sections here at the diameters you're talking about, there's going to be joints with this. Box culverts certainly are used under roadways, but we've also designed applications of box culverts for longer stretches like this. You can think of a couple of applications where they're on the order of hundreds of feet of that. So it's not a unique necessarily application for a box culvert there. One of the things I think concrete will give you here in this particular area with industrial, that's a low cover industrial area, kind of heavy equipment, is the structural strength you're getting from the concrete that some other products you may not get that from. Now, I'll say too, we're going into preliminary design too, right? So it's what we're getting here, what we're identifying here is, I think, with this initial evaluation is, it looks like we've got to do a remove and replace. So we can't do anything inside the existing pipe. We need a minimum of 9-foot circular and a minimum of 8x8 if we go as a box. Now, within those constraints, then, as part of the preliminary design, we can then go, okay, who are the suppliers that can give us these geometries meeting these structural design requirements? And then we can use that to evaluate, is it cost competitive and will it hold up given the conditions that this particular part of the tunnel experience throughout the year. So
I like Mark's suggestion is make sure that you open it up to different materials.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
And the other thing, it's probably minimal in a 9-foot span, but the friction component, and the concrete's got some porosity and, you know, there's a fair amount of friction just moving through there. I don't, I'm not an engineer, I'm just kind of throwing some ideas out. And obviously, this is early in the design phase, it's probably gonna be additional conversations.
Yeah. Well, the friction coefficient is a big one, particularly for the in-pipe options, because that's the seller, the hope, if you will, is that you can go with a smaller area with a smoother pipe. And what we found here is that we're not seeing that benefit for the reduction we would need for a feasible in-pipe alternative.
How about people are, I'm making an assumption, are aligned with the evaluation conclusion that were reached as part of the report, that in line or in pipe repair options are not something worth considering. That was an assumption I made, but just asking it flat out for the board members here, do you guys agree with that conclusion based off what you saw?
I just had kind of one question. That's the sizing and materials. I didn't have questions on that. It was more the invert elevation at the Mississippi currently sits below normal water flow. Did we look at all about raising that, or is there a benefit to that being in the normal water flow?
We didn't look at modifying that. Again, number one, that would require, if modifying that opening or modifying that, then would trigger pretty substantial changes to that river wall.
Okay.
And
yeah,
if we go to modify that river wall, that you're working in the river next to a very barge heavy, a lot of barge traffic. And so the cost for working and making significant changes to that wall is really expensive. And so it was one of the things that we were looking at, was trying to minimize the impacts to that wall, and just knowing what the cost would be.
I mean, you said top cover was a problem too.
It is a cover too. I mean, it's a consideration there through once you move up away from the river, there's not a lot of cover over the pipe there.
What is
Not
the
very deep,
grade of
yeah.
that pipe right now?
It's a good question. I don't know that slope off the top of my head. I don't believe there's a lot of fall to it. It's pretty flat as it approaches the
I
river.
would think so. And you said you still need to evaluate that river wall and its integrity?
So we need to coordinate any impact we have to that river wall with the Port Authority. So that river wall, there is tiebacks to
Yeah.
hold it back. We need to work with them to understand where those are located, how a change in pipe geometry may or may not affect those, and then account for that as part of our design. So that coordination with the authority is an ongoing discussion that would happen throughout, that we would start here. Really, as far as step one.
Dependent on like what that study or coordination shows, if there are changes necessary to that, I mean, does that sink this project or?
Well, there's discussions with the Port Authority if their wall needs upkeep, maintenance, right? It's their wall, so there's coordination with them as far as what they would pay for, what.
Yeah, I mean, we can't really sink our project because
Right.
we have to
Yeah,
repair our
yeah,
pipe, right?
yeah.
So it's like, no matter what, we're gonna have to do something to repair the pipe. The timeline might change if there's significant changes.
When-
to the
I
flow.
guess, so during those discussions, you would probably keep open that invert elevation and looking at that, depending on those findings.
It's something that we can keep open. I think one of the.
I guess I'm just curious if there's a benefit to getting that invert out of the flow,
So
the
just-
normal flow.
It does show the grade on that pipe is only 0.33.
Okay, so it is already, it's pretty flat.
It's flat.
So just to follow up on what Ben's saying, the thing I was gonna ask as you go through the design phase is, it'd be nice to understand, and I'm gonna use a general term as opposed to like return on investment or flood risk reduction or something like that for various options that these guys consider, because the grading, and then obviously that you already looked at the friction in the inlets. It just would be nice to understand, okay, well, if we went with the inlet, here's the houses at risk. If we went and we changed the wall and made the slope 20 degrees, I made up 20, you know what I mean, but just to understand where the design space is and where the actual reduction of risk is a good optimization.
Except that this isn't a flood risk reduction project, this is an emergency repair project, so I understand what you're saying, but
if it's like $500,000 more just to, and the wall needs
Yeah.
repair anyway, and it goes down, that seems like a fair trade-off to make. You get what I'm saying. If it's like $3 million more, that's a very different ballgame for what needs to happen.
My concern was more the integrity of the pipe long-term
Right,
getting in the water, but if it's at a 0.33%
Right,
slope already, you're
we can't
changing that
bring it
so
up.
far, and it doesn't sound like that's even a possibility.
Yeah, and the part with this, keep in mind, we're looking at a fairly short section of
Yeah.
relative to the 33,000 feet, we're looking at a short section, so a change in that invert, then in order to tie back in, is going to increase the length of pipe that would be included in the project.
Mhm.
And then the cost impacts, et cetera, go along with that.
and I'm not sure that we could even really measure
Yeah.
any benefit to properties, for instance,
Well,
that's not the type of project.
I totally get that. If we're gonna look at the hydraulic report and use that as a basis of comparison, it's just in my head is like, well, we don't wanna flow over those man covers is effectively what I'm seeing in some of the earlier phases.
We don't wanna redo or make it worse.
We don't
than
wanna make it
already
worse,
is.
forgive me,
Right.
yeah, so we're not going to
Right.
make it worse by going the in-pipe repairs, we're gonna.
Right.
So that's what
Right.
I'm just trying to
Yeah.
get my head around.
Yep, that makes sense.
Maybe we're making this too long of a conversation, but I'm just thinking that we should, even though this is early in the scope, now is the time to bring alternatives. And is there a possibility of, we're so close to the river. Is there a way that the pipe could have another outlet to it? So put in another pipe that carries X volume at, capacity. So when it's flowing at capacity, obviously that means you're buying or having to get easements to new land. You get 2 pipes now in that section, but then it gives you the potential that you could do the internal. I admit it's probably
That sounds more expensive.
much more expensive.
Yeah, so those are, I mean, right, when you start this, you go from mild to wild, right? So
Yeah.
it's good, it's a good
I
part.
mean, even for that matter, could it be flow that goes, I don't know what the hydraulic regime is, the frequency of time that the pipe is essentially full. If that's 10% of the time or 1% of the time or much higher, I have no idea. If it's down around 1% of the time, where you're really at that full capacity, if you provided some outlet, could it essentially go overland? As I mean, you got a lot of infrastructure, maybe that's not even, a viable type. But I mean, the river's right there, 70 feet from the river.
Yeah, one of the things that I think with that option that we were careful with is that we own the pipe, but we don't own the property.
Yeah.
And so this is one of those, if it were to go overland, that would imply that we're then using area or land that we don't have, or we're not using now. And so to be consistent with our policy and our rules for not increasing flooding on property or changing flood risk, we wanted to be real careful that we weren't, we were looking at options that didn't increase flooding on others' property, even as you're spot on in terms of the amount of time, the frequency at which it is at at that capacity is a very small percentage. I mean, we're talking about, these are the larger events, but that's the upper end of what we manage to. So that also drives our design in many cases.
And,
The other thing it introduces is a new outfall to the river, right? It's another either wall or it's another protected overflow, and new connection to the river becomes very expensive.
Anticipation of a 100-year flow out of a 9-foot pipe would be enormous.
And also, I think us as managers can think about in our watershed district, how can we over time build in projects that decrease the amount of water entering the pipe in the first place by strategically putting projects.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, that is very much a part that I think we've been on that road and will continue to be on that road. But there's the other side of that where we're, because of climate change and Atlas 14, 15, we're getting the higher frequencies of larger and potentially even very large events. And so even though you've done all you could upland, you know, up in the watershed, oh man, here comes the one time.
just to build on that, my opinion, looking at the repairs, is we have to do something. It is an emergency repair, get that, but it's stable currently. And so with the sizable investment this takes, it'd be nice to get some, as long as you guys are going through it, some additional divergent thinking on maybe solutions, and then obviously we'll bring it back in. And given the amount of investment, it feels like we should be pretty close to it as it goes. And so I don't know, we frequently, when we do our bids and whatnot, you know, wait a period of time for the design, wait a period of time for the bidding, but this one seems like it would be a really good one to stay close to as well. That would be the other feeling that I have. So for example, as you guys go through pipe material size, maybe there's a step through the design process, you come in and be like, this is what we found, or this is what we thought so far.
Yeah, it'll definitely be in your updated, in the project status report each month as we're stepping through, and if there's anything where we need a board decision, we'll pull it out for.
Yeah, I figured board decision. I'm very curious, like, let's say you found something like I'm gonna make a PVC tubing that's big, that works out better. I made that up. I don't assume that's that. But if you found an alternative material.
And then, but
Right.
yeah, come to you for,
New carbon nanotube.
I mean, I don't know what you're experimenting with nowadays. I'm just trying to think about it. It's a large investment. We're gonna make it once at the distal end.
We'll have some robots fixing it up. for
Yeah.
us in 10 years. They'll just go on their.
I mean, and just so you know, I mean, the staff at BAR that are working on this also work on large tunnel systems for Capital Region Watershed District and South Washington Watershed. I mean, there's a lot of brain power going into the best solution for this.
Oh yeah, it's definitely not a
Yeah.
trust thing. I
No,
believe
no,
that
I'm
for
just
sure.
saying that, you know, I do trust that they'll bring you guys the best. Solution.
Yeah, what we've done in other realms is maybe have like, okay, so we have the monthly report through, but maybe every other month they just come in and say, yeah, things are looking great, we're going this way. And just, I know Brandon comes pretty frequently, I just might find a way to ask him.
Yeah, and we can just highlight it too in the PFRs.
Yeah, definitely on the PSRs at the minimum.
So do you need from us tonight, any
I don't
action?
need any action tonight. I wanted you to see this so you can see the direction we're going. You can see the budget, which you'll be reflected in the final budget for 2024. So I wanted to make sure you had those numbers in front of you too. So you.
The original budget number was pretty close, so.
Yeah. So I don't think I need anything. Do you feel comfortable with discussion?
Yeah, I think this is, like I say, we've got a path forward outlined here. It's good for me to hear your comments, your feedbacks, what's piquing your interest, what you'd like to see updated, so that way we make sure we get that at a minimum included in the PSR. And then if it's appropriate, you want another update, you let us know and we can provide that information.
That's good.
Cool.
Great.
Administrative report.
Thanks, Brandon. Yeah, so I have informational items. You should have all received an invite to the Watershed Excellence Awards. If you haven't RSVP, please do that by Friday. I know Lauren sent you all a special message yesterday.
It's it makes, I'm a staff and the presentations make me proud.
I'll just give you a verbal, I can't get onto your log. My computer blocks me.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I'll let Emily know that you're a yes then. Is that what-
Yeah.
Will you be bringing a +1?
No.
Okay. Great.
I may know.
You're a no. Okay.
Driving to Texas for a while.
Okay. I know Mark will be there and he'll be there. Good, and I'll check in with that too. Right. The other item on the upcoming events, which I guess is later on in my report too, so we can wait on that for the annual conference, but board.
It's the day to finish registering or to
So
email
let
people.
me know.
Yeah.
So you're a yes for sure, right? Is anyone else able to attend the annual conference?
I will say yes.
You're gonna say
I
yes.
will.
Okay, those two are our delegates.
Jumping ahead to delegates, you two are now our delegates. All right.
I would really like to go, but I'm kind of feeling kind
Yeah.
of getting squeezed.
Yeah.
So if we do have representation, I think I would not put my hand up, but I'm certainly interested and would
We'll take
plan on
another
it for
time.
next year.
Yep, sounds good.
Fun time. That is the one fun annual meeting. I mean, not that they're all.
That's the one thing
It is a good time.
So I'm going to miss it. It
Yeah.
isn't.
Great, thank you. for that. Board action log update. I know you wanted to discuss the West Madness Lake boundary change. I have a meeting scheduled next week with Bowser staff. I'm gonna get everything outlined for you so that you can see exactly how this will move forward.
I will follow up with you offline. I don't need
Yeah,
any
okay.
other update than that.
Okay, sounds good. Staff presentations for the Water Resource Conference. Just wanted to give you some highlights from each of those presentations. I sat in on a number of them or was moderating those sessions. I would say they were all really well received. You got some good comments and questions. If there's anything in particular, you know, some of the staff are here either online or in person to talk about that.
I'm just so happy of how well you guys represent the work that you do. It's just, I like the reception. I mean, to have 100 people going through
Mhm.
implementing inspections for BMP success, Pages talk is. We had more bandwidth tonight. I would ask some additional questions, but I like it.
Yeah, I think it's really rewarding too to see something like with Dave and Brandon's presentation about the outlets. And then to hear Edina say, oh,
Can't wait
let's
to
talk about this.
wear a baseball cap when
He
he
did.
Okay, just kidding. I'll keep my
You ever seen Dave without it?
once. I did not recognize it.
Yeah, we did. I'll make fun of him. Don't worry.
Oh, thumbs up. Dave.
He's still there.
I like how it kind of just feels.
I know.
Yeah, it was great to see. It was a good, and everybody represented really well, presented really well. Dave did excellent. Everybody did. So.
My only question or comment, it seemed like, well, there are 4 or 3, I mean, there are a number of presentations that past conferences, I wasn't able to go this year, but I don't remember that number. I mean, usually it's 1 or 2, isn't it?
Yeah, it's some of them were paired together, so like Pages, the storing water in the lake and the lower the gates was really one presentation that they were given 2 slots for.
Who's this Brandon person you're presenting?
Yeah, it is not. So I sit on the conference
Right.
planning committee and we do talk about that. We don't want, you know, all one entity presenting. But it was still a good mix. I think we take like 85 presentations, you know, so it's still a good mix.
Mhm.
And we like to see different people presenting too. So.
Yeah.
Me and Brandon.
So yeah, that was good. I know there's a few other conference presentations. There was one last week that didn't have time to get into the packet that Eric did and up at Bowser Academy. I can put that in next month as well as I guess the presentation at Mod won't happen in time, but I'll keep you updated on those. Speaking of Minnesota Watersheds Conference, that's the next item on the list. You all should have received the meeting packet, and I had it updated, included in the packet, on our board packet online. There are a few things maybe that our delegates would like to discuss before they go up to represent you. So I don't know if you want me to pull that up and just kind of walk through some of the items that will happen at the conference, and then see if there's any feedback from the rest of the board. Is that something you'd like to?
Do you mind if I ask for people on their time, maybe this week, just to look it over and then
Yeah.
get back to Tina if there's something you want us to talk about?
Yeah, sounds good. I mean, the biggest thing is the resolutions.
Yeah.
I mean, personally, I'll just tell you right now that I would recommend or not recommend, just as the resolutions committee has in this packet, so I don't have anything that.
Well, you're quite
that
close to it
differs.
too, which is good,
Right,
nice to know.
so that, the budget's pretty normal, standard stuff, there's nothing significant there. And I would say the bylaws changes are insignificant as well.
Can I ask, and you don't have to, you kind of defer.
Yeah.
But I think I might have presented years and years ago, so I've been at the conference. But looking at the resolutions, there does seem to be a bit of kind of different take regionally.
Oh, that's fair.
Yeah, so it's, how does that kind of play out within the organization? I mean, is that?
I think that in some cases, well, and I would say the metro region is, different than the other two regions. So there are 3 regions, and there's metro and then there's northern, basically, and the rest of Minnesota. I think in most cases, if a watershed outside of the metro area is asking for something and they feel very passionate about it, and we don't think it would negatively impact us, then they would ask us to support them in that endeavor, even though it might not change how we manage things. So there's a lot of give and take, I would say, in that.
Okay.
But definitely, I mean, for instance, the first one, requiring watershed district permits for the DNR. That is something, typically the DNR will get permits from us, but it's not required of them, so I can see why they're saying. I know that's a bigger deal in other watersheds.
Yeah. Well, the discussion on that one was, WMAs and lands that are being managed, and that doesn't really apply to Hampshire either, so.
Yeah. Yeah, and some of the other ones as well, I think. They're pretty, there's nothing real earth shattering, I would say, in these resolutions this year, so.
Please, if you do read it through, just let Tina know.
Yeah,
Yep.
send me anything. I will take a motion to appoint or to select Val and Ben as the delegates.
So moved.
Second,
Thank you.
All in favor?
yes.
It's fun. It is.
And I will,
Oh, but this one's different. It's more business.
I'll fill out that form and get it in.
Heard
the
stories of
watershed.
business.
A lot of drinking and then
Oh.
business.
And then I can talk with you guys too about kind of the logistics of the conference. The program has changed quite a bit actually to allow you to be both in business and in the educational sessions, so.
I was gonna say, do you need our selections on?
No, you can just pick as you go.
Okay.
Okay, and we do have hotel rooms for you, so I'll get you that information.
And there was a time when I was a delegate and Larry was a delegate and we voted separately. We had different opinions. So you don't have to vote the same.
Yeah. Okay, and then.
I just want to tell you one other thing too, that I didn't realize until like the 10th year, that there's also one that's like, in your agenda, you'll see that there's business meetings, and there'll be a business meeting for like our metro group that you want to go sit in a circle and listen to while people talk about.
Yeah, that's the
things.
caucus, regional caucus.
Regional
meeting,
caucus one.
And that starts at 7 AM on Oh, Thursday
Yikes.
morning, so.
Jeez.
But they're doing that so that you
If you miss it,
can,
it's not the end of the
so
world.
you don't miss the educational session, because they used to be at the same time, and then managers were like, well, I wanna go listen to the talks. So.
I'm excited about all of it.
That's fine.
That doesn't bother me.
You're on my
Okay.
bike.
Yes.
Governance.
Yeah, the last item was the governance.
So this,
Scroll way down.
this is one that I may suggest prior to a board meeting, just all come together and talk about it. Cause I think that would be a nice way to punctuate what Tina's written here in her section. So we've provided feedback. Some of us provided feedback, others are delinquent.
And have promised we got-
Yes, I know, that would be me. But I thought it might be, this particular one might be nice to maybe account for an hour or half an hour prior to a meeting, or start a meeting that's kind of late to do, maybe in the next few months. If you guys are okay with that, we could talk, Tina, you and I can ask
Sure.
people for timing on it, but I think just coordinate it on a Thursday, instead of doing a tour, we do a talk about this and then.
Yeah, have a little workshop ahead of the meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mean about the resolutions or about what?
About the, just the governance manual and the roles
manuals.
and that
Oh,
discussion,
okay.
yeah. Yeah, not the resolutions.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of combined a few things in this item, but that would be for the governance manual, and then I will have a policy
Yeah,
for
for
the
the
employee
employee.
manual, so we can get that enacted.
Which
before
we
the first
don't
of the year,
need as
but
much input on.
No.
Yeah.
I'll be taking a, model policy. And using it. Thanks, all I got.
From a board actions, I emailed Tina prior, and those, the two that I really wanted to talk about, we've covered. So I feel fairly good about that. I don't see any additional action yet. So I'd like to move to project and program status report. I don't have anything pressing. I will just email people, or you,
Yeah,
I
that
will
sounds
email
good.
you.
Yep. Yeah, if there's any comments or questions about any of those items, we can take them, otherwise. we're good to go.
The only thing I would say is observationally looking at the list of the table, whatever you call it, it seems like there are a number of things that some action has been taken.
Mhm.
And so it kind of, to me, suggests there might be an appetite to add some. And I don't know if that's a correct interpretation or not.
You mean by ads?
Add additional topics
Hmm.
for future consideration.
Yeah, I think if there's topics that, see, the point of the action log was because we would have conversations, and then
Yeah.
those things would kind of get lost. The things that the board's like, oh, I'd like to hear more about that, and then it would kind of get lost in the
Right.
shuffle of things. So making sure we're tracking that. So it's a place where, as we're having our discussions, if we come across a topic that could use more discussion or bring back more information, then we can add it for sure.
So if there are things that we see, we can share it with the board,
Yeah.
because that's a part of that log.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you cited one where you walked past a pond that was heavily silted. You've actually mentioned it a couple of
Yep.
times. If we needed to actually go deeper into that particular topic, or maybe ask for some additional, that would be one of them. I had one kind of on deck around buffers specifically after reading this page that I just want to work out in my head before
Yeah.
asking for it. But yeah, things to that effect.
I mean, the interesting thing as we move into the watershed management plan update too, is some of these topics will be coming out of, like we'll naturally be diving deeper into some of these topics. So
Agreed.
Yeah.
it's
I
good.
mean, it just seemed to me like the planting of edibles, there was a presentation.
Mhm.
And it seemed like there was a topic that was of interest. I don't know that we would see that return to a board packet, but it sounds like there may be interest, so if we see something, just share it.
Yeah,
And
actually,
I
that's
hadn't
an
really had
interest-
that appreciation.
That's an interesting mention, because we are actually, is that next month? Next
I
month,
believe so.
when Marcy's gonna come talk to you about, we're looking at like compiling all those new technology report.
Yeah.
items and then looking at where we've implemented, where we could implement, you know, how we use that information so that you can.
Who do we send, like, if we did some self-research on different alternatives, who do we send that to out like? BAR has a group of folks who look through technology, we have, some who look through. Who do we send it to you and say, hey, I saw this, what do you think?
Yep. And then I can send it on either to BAR or other staff or me.
Yeah. You're an idiot.
Yeah.
Well, any comments or further comments? That's also what the board manager comment section is for at the end. So if you see something as you're walking through, or please bring it up on section 13 at a minimum.
Yeah, I didn't have anything to bring tonight, but it's just trying to, as I'm getting a
was
little more
anticipating.
into understanding my role.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
Well, so do I have a motion then to adjourn? Second.
I'll second that.